Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Jeff Mitchell. I believe leaders must be anticipatory to chart a path forward. We can either be proactive and move forward, or sit back and be reactive and risk falling behind. Wayfinders Lead, the NCAA Pathway Program, is designed to incubate and inspire the next generation of executives in our profession. I am grateful for my pathway experience and encourage others to explore their own opportunity in the NCAA Pathway Program.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Chris Barker. Chris is the Director of Athletics at Southern Connecticut State University. Greetings, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me today. Really excited to talk.
I'm excited too. This is 1 year to the day as the Director of Athletics at Southern Connecticut State. Talk to me about that feeling, 1 year to the day.
You know, I think especially as an administrator, you always have your goals, and as an athlete, you have your goals. For me, it was my dream. It's been in the making for the last 10 years of my career to really be a director of athletics. So to be on my 1 year anniversary, you get those chills and those feelings where I just love what I do. And I tell everyone it doesn't feel like a job just because it's working with people and relationships. So for me, I think it's just really special to be able to do that and wake up every day. And, my motto is 1% better every day. Right. And, my wife sees it. The people that I work with, the administrators, the coaches, it's cool because this year I kept a running spreadsheet of all the things that and I say we, because I just get to be the person who stands up and tells that story. But the things that we've accomplished at Southern Connecticut State in the last year have been amazing, but it's been through the power of we, not me.
That's excellent. 1 year in. Now, your background is interesting. You worked with Andrew Gavin at Wisconsin Parkside. You've coached baseball, played baseball, right?
Yep.
And what's interesting is your parents, you come from a family whose parents didn't go to college. They're entrepreneurial. They owned a deli, right?
Yep.
And so when your family business is a family business, everybody's a part of the family business. And you think about who you need around you to be successful. If you're smart, you don't have time for discrimination.
Right.
You don't have time for being mean to people. You don't have time for not creating an environment that people want to be a part of. So offline, you told me your philosophy included inclusion and hard work, I think it is.
Yep.
And we'll dive into that here shortly. But I want you to talk to me a little bit about coming out of baseball, making the transition into administration, and using some of the philosophies that you saw growing up in terms of having parents who were in a hardworking and inclusive environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I really was forged in those fires of inclusion and hard work because, again, my parents, I come from a biracial family. Dad's black, mom's white. So I didn't know the difference between, what you look like, your creeds, where you're from, and then growing up in that deli, that small, the entrepreneurial business. You couldn't be that way, right? It was always the customer first, service first, and make sure that they were right and whatever the needs were, you met them. And our family really was that way. I give a lot of credit to my parents because they did a couple things, right? They always told us you can be whoever you want to be. You just have to work hard. But they never stopped us from having opportunities that we probably shouldn't have had. But they were really good about that, and they really propelled us to that. And for me in my career, when I recruited student athletes, it was always, right, I'm going to recruit talent, and then I'm going to maximize talent, right? You don't recruit somebody to an organization and then change them. No, you take their strengths and you really enhance them. And I've been fortunate to be able to do that as an administrator. Andrew Gavin was great doing that with me. I was able to lead from my chair in every position. You can look at my track record with him. He promoted me like 3 times in 2.5 years, and he'll be the first one to tell you that. But he was really a great advocate for me. Leadership development at the NCAA, MOA have been really great advocates for me. Dr. Bob Bond, who now passed, he's a Hall of Fame AD, a mentor of mine. One of the philosophies he's had that I really took to heart was you have to lead yourself first. So all those things you talk about, how is this young? I'm 33 years old. How are you after a 1 year anniversary at a Division II? And it's really because of all these things that came together. And, one of the things, again, I talk about the things I learned from my parents at a young age is when you have an opportunity, you run through it, right? When a door opens, you run. You don't look back. You do everything you can, and you live in that moment, and you just make sure that you do everything possible to make the place that you're at the best place.
Best place. What's interesting to me is at 1 year in, this is your first NACTA in person as an athletics director, right? So you walk around, you're like, last time I was at NACTA in person, I wasn't in the role that I'm in now, but now I'm here. So you said something there that was akin to tracking the winds, right? And you hear people say that because you can get overwhelmed with trying to achieve goals and overwhelmed with all the negative that has happened. But writing down the wins, even the small wins, allows you to look back and be grateful for the things that happened and use that gratefulness to be able to at least manage the next 5 minutes, the next 1 minute, the next 30 seconds, and keep going forward and keep moving forward. Talk to me about that spreadsheet. Give me a couple of highlights off of it, and tell me how that has been, I assume, infectious amongst the staff
Yeah.
here at Southern Connecticut State.
Yeah. Well, I think it's everyone says you have to see it to believe it, and I think it is true. I think a lot of people, you can preach things, but until you actually show them, the proof is where the pudding's at, then I think they really do believe it. So for my staff and for the student athletes, it's been remarkable. It's actually, I had a staff member right now send me a picture just from a marketing and branding, something that we're doing and just trying to create that awareness on our building. And they showed me an update. I'm going, holy cow, right? It's these little things, because really, you can get one big boulder, right? It's just a lot like fundraising too. You can get one big donor, but that's not always going to happen. So to show progress and growth, especially to your staff and the students, it's these little things. And that's where that 1% better every day. Think about that. If we all did one thing better, one thing better every day, you'd have 365 things to be proud of, right? Well, holy cow, that's a big improvement. That's more than 100% improvement. So for me and for my staff, it's been really a lot of fun. But also, I was able to create these buckets, whether it be academics, right? That was one area, and student well-being, leadership, organization, like that was another one, marketing, engagement. These are all these buckets that when I first took this job, and I knew that from the pathway program, I needed to make sure that I was intentional with what I did. But also it was a way for me to say, don't let this whole thing overwhelm you, because my personality is, you see a problem, you fix it, right? And it's really helped me to be able to actually strategically organize my thoughts, but also get things accomplished on a really consistent basis.
Are there a couple things on there that you can tell us, how you measured it, in terms of considering it a win, and I guess what you expected the outcome at whatever point that you wrote down the win, right?
Yeah, some of my proudest victories obviously are around the student athlete experience. First off, we had student athletes that were moving in fall sports, for example. Historically, prior to me, every year they came in on a Monday. Well, parents, guardians, how do you get a student there on a Monday? You got to take off work. So, for me, I thought about my experience as a student athlete, my experience as a coach. I went to school. I'm from Wisconsin, went to school in North Carolina. My mom at that time couldn't have driven me down there. So how is that fair to the parent? How is that fair to the student? And you're leaving your child here with who? Some of you just met an hour ago. This crazy ball guy looking at me. You're like, oh, this is the guy I'm leaving my kid with. So I think that was a big piece of that. But that was something that I was able to get done. I started June 27th, and actually got that done before August 14th. Well, you got to move mountains, right? And you say, well, how do you get something like that done in that short of time? Well, one of the things that I really believe in is relationships, right? That goes back to my background with my parents, being in a store. You only get a minute when you meet people. So Ty, if you think I'm awful or I stink, it's because I didn't make a good impression within that minute. And it's something I say to student athletes all the time. You have 1 minute to make this impression. So for me, when I get in front of even people across campus, in the community, alumni, donors, I got to impress you. I have 1 minute to tell you why. Hey, this is where we are. This is where we're going. And this is how I'm going to help you get there. And that's something that really has really made leaps and bounds progress. But that student athlete movement was a huge one. And then just going after student athlete surveys, I was fortunate that we worked with the Picture Group. They had given us surveys and they had helped our organization, our university, get that established. Fueling station was one of them, right? So I was able to get a donor and work with the school to get a fueling station created.
Big win.
That's huge, right? It's those student athlete experiences that really make a difference, making sure that, hey, when you go on the road, you're not eating McDonald's. And Southern's a great place, right? We have a lot of proud history. We have Olympians. We have Mr. Universe, right? We have a lot of people. Carol Stiff, ESPN, she's a big timer, right? All these people. So we have a lot to be proud of, and we also have a lot to go to the future with, right? So a lot to build on.
What's interesting about specifically the fueling station is the win could be the fueling station, but you think about the small wins that led up to the win, right? A, the survey. So are we able to process this data in order to figure out what the student athletes need, right? B, are we able to find someone who's willing to contribute to this and set up a meeting and try to get that done? Win, we got it done. Are we able to ask, and are they going to give us what we asked for? Win, we got it done. And then are we able to figure out what specific needs in a fueling station we need to give our student athletes to help them be successful, healthy, mental, physical, and everything else? So the number of wins, small wins, in that whole situation. I appreciate that. I think that's a wonderful thing. A year in, I guarantee you've made some big decisions, right? Tough decisions. Probably had some tough conversations. So there have been celebrations. There have been challenges. If you would give us first some of the challenges that you've been through that you can talk about, right, in terms of being the athletics director at Southern Connecticut State for 1 year that you've already had to deal with, right?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones when you talk about, and everyone AED is going through this right now, I think mental health. I think going through and making sure that the services are there for the student athletes. And I'll be the first one to tell you, and I think it comes from the students that everyone in the country are not doing enough. And specifically at Southern, it's one of the focuses that I have. And it's been part of those things when you think about, at the end of the day, being an AD and you talk about what's the hardest part about it. Well, at the end of the day, it stops at your desk, right? So it's living up to that, knowing and taking feedback, and making it constructive and making sure that you can have outcomes that are productive in the future with that. So I think that's been a challenge. I think COVID was still a challenge this year. If you would have asked me when I was in the process a year and a half ago, are you still going to be dealing with COVID and managing that and creating guidelines and being able to pivot and adjust? I would have said, no way, no shot. That's not happening, right? We're done with COVID. So that was definitely a challenge because it was still on this, the forefront of all of our minds, and we still had to actually interact with that, especially in being in the Northeast. And it was still very alive out there, unfortunately, and everyone in the country. So pivoting and being able to keep our staff engaged because no one wanted to go back to virtual, right? No one wanted to hear about a pause and a shutdown. I had to shut down a team, a couple teams, and that was hard. But it's having those conversations, and being upfront with people like, hey, we're going to get through this and we're going to get through it together, and luckily it's only 10 days now at one of the point, right? But that was definitely a challenge. And I think personnel is always, you're a new leader. And good leaders listen and observe. I've been asked a lot, well, how do you observe talent? How do you manage talent? You got to listen. One of the best things I did, and I would give this advice to anyone who wants to be an AD or going into their first 90 days, did a survey of our admin and all of our head coaches. And I said, a couple strengths of where we are, basically did a SWOT with them. So, and it was fun because I actually just had the opportunity to look back at it, before I came out here to NACTA. And it's amazing what people say. And then to be actually say, well, we did this. That's when you have growth. And that's where you have that buy-in.
Yeah, that's excellent, right? You take what definitely is a challenge, figure out how to turn that thing around. Um, Tough conversations, right? In terms of being a leader, and they can be about a number of things, right? Whether you have to move on from somebody, whether you have to tell somebody, hey, you got to do a little better than what you're doing, or whether you got to talk to the person you report to and inform them of something that may not be the best news. Tell me about that aspect, the challenging conversations.
Well, it does come back to relationships. I think that's probably the hardest part is you only been here a year and you have to have those conversations.
Exactly.
So those relationships, they may be somewhat premature in some sense, right? But really being open and honest, transparent. Again, I go back to my days and why growing up in a deli, right? It forged me and it really prepared me because I always tell people, I'm going to tell you good news or bad news, indifferent. I'm going to do it with a smile, but it's going to be consistent. And I'm going to be open and honest with you. And that's really all you can do, whether you're managing up to your boss, your direct report, the VP, or if you're going to student athletes. And I always think about, well, why am I even an athletic director? Why did I want to be in this position? And it really is because my experiences, again, as a student, as a coach, and I just craved more and knew I could do more. And that's why I left coaching. I said, I can affect more than 35 student athletes. Right. And I wanted that, and it fuels me, and it still fuels me to this day. I hope it always fuels me because it really is important, and people say they hate walking across campus with me. They hate going anywhere with me because I stop and I talk to people.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why are you talking to them? Well, because I don't know.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you're a student athlete, student, or if you're the provost. I got to know you. Right. That's how we're going to grow. And that's culture to me.
Yeah.
So
when it comes down to tough conversations, like because you have the relationship,
it makes it a little bit easier.
A little bit easier.
A little bit. But it's still managing expectations, right? I think when you're in the chair, you really do understand that. And I had, Bob Bonnie was a legendary Hall of Famer, right? He would always say it's the rule of thirds. 30 people going to love you, 30 people that hate you, 30 people don't care, right? So you do have to have a little bit thicker skin with that. And I think for me, that's probably one of the things that I always continue to work on with my own leadership because I love people, right? And I love this relational aspect. But part of that is growing through that third of the population who hates you, right? But it has to be driven through respect.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of those conversations this year, but you get better from them.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you're coming in with the respect, it makes the conversation easier to manage, I guess, right?
Yep. Always.
Let's look a little bit at, and you mentioned this on a number of times already, but inclusion and hard work, right? It's something that you talked about your parents, kind of how they ran the deli. Do they still have the deli?
Nope. They sold it when we were about 12 years old.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So how they ran the deli as you were coming up. But talk about that, your insight and philosophy on inclusion and hard work and how that has helped you with your career and then being a leader.
Yeah.
Staff. Yeah.
Well, I think it helps. Baseball, I think you would say, especially, African-American, it's not overly diverse, especially college. So I think one of the things that I really have enjoyed with sport and then coaching it, I was able to lay that platform, as a student athlete, again, and as a coach. I was able to say that and recruited student athletes. I worked at HBCU, right? So that was a great experience for me. But in terms of administration and leadership, you talk about best practice with hiring, right? And being intentional about it. And then you go in terms of being an AD or administrator, being intentional about your programming. You have to be intentional about this work, especially inclusion, and you have to work hard at it. So for me, again, you talk about it was the fundamentals, my foundation, my base. But if you don't wake up, Andrew says this, Andrew Gavin says this all the time. If you don't wake up thinking about it, well, how are you going to get better at it? But for me, again, it's a little bit, I don't want to say it's easier just because I was born into that. But I do think about it. I think about what does it look like to go in a room where no one looks like you? What does it look like to actually be racially profiled? And for our student athletes to actually feel, and why I think it's so important for all administrators to talk to student athletes, because you don't know how they're feeling. Again, you talk about it, toughest thing is coming out of a pandemic and we're still going through that and we're still figuring out what it looks like. Well, you better have relationships. I go back to that side of it too. And you better make sure, again, hard work inclusion, you better work hard at those relationships. And you better make sure you're inclusive and you're working and talking to not just one population, right, all the populations.
Yeah.
Right.
A year in, you come in and you have your leadership philosophy and you start executing your leadership philosophy. But I imagine that philosophy has evolved after a year because things change, right? You come into the chairs, you expect to do things and things aren't what you expected. So you got to evolve to make things work. Tell me about some of the evolution of your thoughts on leadership, your thoughts on managing situations and leading people, and where you are now based to where you were when you first stepped in the chair.
Yeah, I think after a year, Ty, I specifically would say let things season. Again, my natural, I would say at my core, I see a problem. You see a piece of trash on the ground, you pick it up. That's really who I am. It's just the way I was raised, and I always will be. So for me, it's letting things season. I think as a leader, as I get older and I get wiser, I definitely will be able to do that, let things develop even more. But in terms of people specifically, I think it's continuing to let them grow, and being intentional about hearing them out and asking them, something I do with student athletes all the time. I said, what do you want to be? Right. When I get them in front of alumni and donors, I say, tell them your major, tell them what your career's goals, aspirations are. Don't just talk about sport. Right. I think it's the same thing with administrators. I think I would, especially going to this year, I'll do that more often. I did it a couple times, but when you have a seasoned group, so I come from a unionized setting. So a lot of the employees, the administrators have been there, I think the least 10 years to 7 years, and the rest of them are 10 to 20. So you have a group of people, which is amazing because they love the place we're at. They love Southern. They bleed blue. But it's also making sure that we're still sharpening that sword and that tool belt, right? Making sure you're equipped throughout the year, and you got to ask questions, right? And, say, hey, well, why are you doing that? And that was part of year one too. I had to ask a lot of questions, which is great. But I need to evolve those questions this year as I move into year two.
Get better in terms of asking them and what you're trying to get, and really, from my experience, asking questions is what I do. Is you can ask a question and people may not answer the question, or you got to hear the answer that they're not giving you, right? Yep. And especially in a leadership position, that's one of the most important things, hearing what's not said, even though people are talking kind of situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So tell me about the, as we wrap here, a couple more questions and then we'll wrap. The situation with the person you report to, right? The relationship there, that person's expectations, your expectations for that person, asking for more resources. I mean, all the things that come with a supervisor type relationship. And when you talk about athletics, which you would hope on most campuses, athletics is part of the academic mission of the university. So tell me about that relationship with the person you report to.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. So I actually report to the VP of Student Affairs. And again, small world, higher education, college athletics, athletics in general. So my VP was in grad school with my last president.
Oh, wow.
So she was able to call her before she even offered me the job. But she knew what she was getting. So, for me in that relationship, the biggest thing is transparency. No secrets with, obviously, my VP. She's a great advocate. She's a big believer in athletics. But one of the things that she's really craved is the strategic plan. So we've been fortunate enough to work with, the Pictor Group. They were the search firm that helped me get there. And work with them on strategic planning. So for me, it's building this next 5 years after this year. But having this campus buy-in was huge. So it's not like it's just athletics. And that's part of the problem with a lot of universities. It's just this athletics and you're telling one story and one-sided. Well, no, now this strategic plan, the way we've done it and gone about it, it's been involving everyone across campus. So there has to be this buy-in because it's like, well, everyone said it. And then everyone will agree to it once we're done with it, So it's really been transparency, honesty. We would meet twice a week. But she really is. She's my biggest fan. She recruited me there. She knew that she needed to make sure that I was equipped, but also that we were on the same page. And that's why it's been fun. And like I said, we just work together and we don't have surprises.
Which is excellent. And last question here. Tell me about how that relationship and that philosophy and that environment helps you when you hire staff, right? In terms of bringing somebody into the environment.
Yeah, well, it's funny because we just made a hire and she wanted to be more involved, right? And she was very open throughout the process at the end. And I said, well, I want to be intentional about your time as well. I'm respectful of that because I know how my calendar is, but it really helps your culture knowing that you have somebody all the way at the top. And the president has been great at Southern as well. The whole family has opened me with open arms and my family coming into it. So I think that's made it a lot easier. But it also makes it a lot easier to attract talent, attract people, and more so retain people to that institution.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, sounds like you're doing big things here.
Trying.
We're here at a year to the day,
Yep.
right? And you want to keep accomplishing, keep writing down those wins and those victories and showing people, hey, we're doing great things.
That's
Sometimes
right.
things may be tough, but let's look at the list of what we accomplished.
I call it the all way. It's the process towel.
Yeah.
That's how we do it, and that's really how we get through our institution and all the struggles, but how we grow in the process.
All right, well, Chris, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Ty, it's been a pleasure, and I appreciate you having me.
Yes, sir. That was Chris Barker. Chris is Director of Athletics at Southern Connecticut State University. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.